Okay, Hitler's birthday, 1940. Against all hopelessness, Liesel still checked the mailbox each afternoon throughout March and well into April. This was despite a Hans requested visit from Frau Heinrich, who explained to the Hubermans that the foster care office had lost contact completely with Paula Meminger. Still, the girl persisted, and as you might expect, each day when she searched the mail, there was nothing. Molking, like the rest of Germany, was in the grip of preparing for Hitler's birthday. This particular year, with the development of the war and Hitler's current victorious position, the Nazi partisans of Molking wanted the celebration to be especially befitting. There would be a parade, marching, music, singing. There would be a fire. While Liesel walked the streets of Molking, picking up and delivering washing and ironing, Nazi party members were accumulating fuel. A couple of times, Liesel was a witness to men and women knocking on doors, asking people if they had any material that they felt should be done away with or destroyed. Papa's copy of the Molking Express announced that there would be a celebratory fire in the town square, which would be attended by all local Hitler youth divisions. It would commemorate not only the Führer's birthday, but the victory over his enemies, and over the restraints that had held Germany back since the end of World War I. Any materials it requested from such times, newspapers, posters, books, flags, and any found propaganda of our enemies should be brought forward to the Nazi Party office on Munich Street. Even Schillerstrasse, the Road of Yellow Stars, which was still awaiting its renovation, was ransacked one last time to find something, anything, to burn in the name of the Führer's glory. It would have come as no surprise if certain members of the party had gone away and published 1,000 or so books or posters of poisonous moral matter simply to incinerate them. Everything was in place to make April 20 magnificent. It would be a day full of burning and cheering and book thievery. In the Huberman household that morning, all was typical. That soccer's looking out the window again, cursed Rosa Huberman. Every day, she went on. What are you looking at this time? Oh, moaned Papa with delight. The flag cloaked his back from the top of the window. You should have a look at this woman. I can see. He glanced over his shoulder and grinned at Liesel. I might just go and run after her. She leaves you for dead, Mama. Schwein, she shook the wooden spoon at him. Papa continued looking out the windows at an imaginary woman and a very real corridor of German flags. On the streets of Malking that day, each window was decorated for the Führer. In some places, like Frau Diller's, the glass was vigorously washed and the swastika looked like a jewel on a red and white blanket. In others, the flag trundled from the ledge, like washing hung out to dry, but it was there. Earlier, there had been a minor calamity. The Hubermans couldn't find their flag. They'll come for us, Mama warned her husband. They'll come and take us away. We have to find it. At one point, it seemed like Papa might have to go down to the basement and paint a flag on one of his drop sheets. Thankfully, it turned up, buried behind the accordion in the cupboard. That infernal accordion, it was blocking my view, Mama swiveled. Liesel. The girl had the honor of pinning the flag to the window frame. Hans Jr. and Trudy came home for the afternoon eating, like they did at Christmas or Easter. Now seems like a good time to introduce them a little more comprehensively. Hans Jr. and Trudy are the children of Rosa and Hans, no? Hans Jr. had the eyes of his father and the height. The silver in his eyes, however, wasn't warm, like Papa's. The silver in his eyes, however, wasn't warm like Papa's. They'd been feared. There was more flesh on his bones, too, and he had prickly blonde hair and skin like off-white paint. Trudy, or Trudel as she was often known, was only a few inches taller than Mama. She had cloned Rosa Huberman's unfortunate waddlesome walking style, but the rest of her was much milder. Being a live-in housemaid in a wealthy part of Munich, she was most likely bored of children, but she was always capable of at least a few smiled words in Liesel's direction. She had soft lips, a quiet voice. They came home together on the train from Munich, and it didn't take long for old tensions to rise up. A short history of Hans Habermann versus his son. The young man was a Nazi, his father was not. In the opinion of Hans Jr., his father was part of an old, decrepit Germany, one that allowed everyone else to take it for the proverbial ride while its own people suffered. As a teenager, he was aware that his father had been called der Judenmaler, the Jew painter, for painting Jewish houses. Then came an incident I'll fully present to you soon enough, the day Hans blew it on the verge of joining the party. Everyone knew you weren't supposed to paint over slurs written on a Jewish shop front. Such behavior was bad for Germany, and it was bad for the transgressors. So Hans and his son have a very tense relationship, no? Because the son is a Nazi, but Hans isn't good. And Hans good, he paints the house of Jews, and whenever someone vandalizes bad words about Jews, Hans paints over them. And so the son gets very frustrated since the son is very like Nazi, pro-Hitler, good, no? But Hans Habermann is very anti-Hitler. He's very against it, no? And he shows it. And so there's a lot of tension between father and son. So have they let you in yet? Hans Jr. was picking up where they'd left off at Christmas. And what? Take a guess, the party. No, I think they've forgotten about me. Well, have you even tried again? You can't just sit around waiting for the new world to take it with you. You have to go out and be part of it despite your past mistakes. Papa looked up. Mistakes? I've made many mistakes in my life, but not joining the Nazi party isn't one of them. They still have my application, you know that, but I couldn't go back to ask. That was when a great shiver arrived. It waltzed through the window with a draft. Perhaps it was the breeze of the Third Reich gathering even greater strength, or maybe it was just Europe again breathing. Either way, it fell across them as their metallic eyes clashed like tin cans in the kitchen. You've never cared about this country, said Hans Jr. Not enough, anyway. Papa's eyes started corroding. It did not stop Hans Jr. He looked now for some reason at the girl, with her 3 books standing upright on the table, as if in conversation. Liesel was silently mouthing the words as she read from one of them. And what trash is this girl reading? She should be reading Mein Kampf. Liesel looked up. Don't worry, Liesel, Papa said. Just keep reading. He doesn't know what he's saying. But Hans Jr. wasn't finished. He stepped closer and said, You're either for the Fuhrer or against him. And I can see that you're against him. You always have been. Liesel watched Hans Jr. in the face, fixated on the thinness of his lips and the rocky line of his bottom teeth. It's pathetic how a man can stand by and do nothing as a whole nation cleans out the garbage and makes itself great. Trudy and Mama sat silently, scaredly, as did Liesel. There was the smell of pea soup, something burning, and confrontation. They were all waiting for the next words. They came from the son, just 2 of them. You coward. He upturned them into Papa's face, and he promptly left the kitchen and the house. Ignoring futility, Papa walked to the doorway and called out to his son, Coward? I'm the coward? He then rushed to the gate and ran pleadingly after him. Mama hurried to the window, ripped away the flag, and opened up. She, Trudy, and Liesel all crowded together, watching a father catch up to his son and grab hold of him, begging him to stop. They could hear nothing, but the manner in which Hans Jr. shrugged loose was loud enough. The sight of Papa watching him walk away roared at them from up the street. Hansi, Mama finally cried out. Both Trudy and Liesel flinched from her voice. Come back. The boy was gone. Yes, the boy was gone, and I wish I could tell you that everything worked out for the younger Hans Habermann, but it didn't. When he vanished from Himmel Street that day in the name of the Fuhrer, he would hurtle through the events of another story, each step leading tragically to Russia, to Stalingrad. So Hans, the son of Hans and Rosa, no, he leaves. He's mad because his father isn't a Nazi, so he leaves his family, and then now death is going to tell us what happened to him. Some facts about Stalingrad. In 1942 and early 43, in that city, the sky was bleached bedsheet white each morning. All day long, as I carried the souls across it, that sheet was splashed with blood until it was full and bulging to the earth. In the evening, it would be wrung out and bleached again, ready for the next dawn. And that was when the fighting was only during the day. With his son gone, Hans Habermann stood for a few moments longer. The street looked so big. When he reappeared inside, Mama fixed her gaze on him, but no words were exchanged. She didn't admonish him at all, which, as you know, was highly unusual. Perhaps she decided he was injured enough, having been labeled a coward by his only son. For a while he remained silently at the table after the eating was finished. Was he really a coward, as his son had so brutally pointed out? Certainly in World War I he considered himself one. He attributed his survival to it. But then, is there cowardice in the acknowledgement of fear? Is there cowardice in being glad that you lived? His thoughts crisscrossed the table as he stared into it. "Papa?" Liesel asked, but he did not look at her. What was he talking about? What did he mean when... "Nothing," Papa answered. He spoke quiet and calm to the table. "It's nothing. Forget about him, Liesel." It took perhaps a minute for him to speak again. "Shouldn't you be getting ready?" He looked at her this time. "Don't you have a bonfire to go to?" "Yes, Papa." The book thief went and changed into her Hitler Youth uniform, and half an hour later they left, walking to the BDM headquarters. From there, the children would be taken to the town square in their groups. Speeches would be made, a fire would be lit, a book would be stolen. So again, no, the whole of part 2 is just leading us to the moment na Liesel steals a book from a fire because she hates Hitler. And we're slowly getting there already. 100% pure German sweat. People lined the streets as the youth of Germany marched towards the town hall and the square. On quite a few occasions, Liesel forgot about her mother and any other problem of which she currently held ownership. There was a swell in her chest as the people clapped them on. Some kids waved to their parents, but only briefly. It was an explicit instruction that they march straight and don't look or wave to the crowd. When Rudy's group came into the square and was instructed to halt, there was a discrepancy. Tommy Muller. The rest of the regiment stopped marching, and Tommy plowed directly into the boy in front of him. "Dump cough," the boy spat before turning around. "I'm sorry," said Tommy, arms held apologetically out. His face tripped over itself. "I couldn't hear." It was only a small moment, but it was also a preview of troubles to come. For Tommy, for Rudy. At the end of the marching, the Hitler Youth divisions were allowed to disperse. It would have been near impossible to keep them all together as the bonfire burned in their eyes and excited them. Together, they cried, one united, Heil Hitler, and were free to wander. Liesel looked for Rudy, but once the crowd of children scattered, she was caught inside a mess of uniforms and high-pitched words, kids calling out to other kids. By 4:30, the air had cooled considerably. People joked that they needed warming up. That's all this trash is good for anyway. Carts were used to wheel it all in. It was dumped in the middle of the town square and doused with something sweet. Books and paper and other material would slide or tumble down, only to be thrown back onto the pile. From further away, it looked like something volcanic, or something grotesque and alien that had somehow landed miraculously in the middle of town and needed to be snuffed out and fast. The applied smell leaned towards the crowd, who were kept at a good distance. There were well in excess of 1,000 people on the ground, on the town hall steps, on the rooftops that surrounded the square. When Liesel tried to make her way through, a crackling sound prompted her to think that the fire had already begun. It hadn't. The sound was kinetic humans, flowing, charging up. They've started without me. Although something inside told her that this was a crime, after all, her 3 books were the most precious items she owned. She was compelled to see the thing lit. She couldn't help it. I guess humans like to watch a little destruction. Sand castles, houses of cards, that's where they begin. Their great skill is their capacity to escalate. The thought of missing it was eased when she found a gap in the bodies and was able to see the mound of guilt still intact. It was prodded and splashed, even spat on. It reminded her of an unpopular child, forlorn and bewildered, powerless to alter its fate. No one liked it. Head down, hands in pockets, forever. Amen. Okay, so there's this big pile of books, of magazines, of anything that could be interpreted as anti-Nazi and anti-Hitler, and they were all spitting on it, and they were pouring gasoline on it, and they were gonna set it on fire. Bits and pieces continued falling to its sides as Liesel hunted for Rudy. Where is that sockerel? When she looked up, the sky was crouching. A horizon of Nazi flags and uniforms rose upward, crippling her view every time she attempted to see over a smaller child's head. It was pointless. The crowd was itself. There was no swaying it, squeezing through, or reasoning with it. You breathed with it and you sang its songs. You waited for its fire. Silence was requested by a man on a podium. His uniform was shiny brown. The iron was practically still on it. The silence began. His first words, Heil Hitler. His first action, the salute to the Führer. Today is a beautiful day, he continued. Not only is it our great leader's birthday, but we also stop our enemies once again. We stop them reaching into our minds. Liesel still attempted to fight her way through. We put an end to the disease that has been spread through Germany for the last 20 years, if not more. He was performing now what is called a Schreierei, a consummate exhibition of passionate shouting, warning the crowd to be watchful, to be vigilant, to seek out and destroy the evil machinations plotting to infect the motherland with its deplorable ways. The immoral, the Kommunitzen, that word again, that old word, dark rooms, suit-wearing men, Die Juden, the Jews. Halfway through the speech, Liesel surrendered. As the word communist seized her, the remainder of the Nazi recital swept by either side, lost somewhere in the German feet around her. Waterfalls of words. A girl treading water. She thought it again. Kommunisten. Up until now, at the BDM, they had been told that Germany was the superior race. But no one else in particular had been mentioned. Of course, everyone knew about the Jews, as they were the main offender in regard to violating the German ideal. Not once, however, had the communists been mentioned until today, regardless of the fact that people of such political creed were also to be punished. Okay? So in this speech, guys, on Hitler's birthday, the one giving the speech mentions that communists will be treated like Jews good. And Liesel knows her family, her original family, her original father, her real father and mother, they were communists good. And so this is kind of her eyes opening to the fact that Hitler probably did to them what he was doing to the Jews, no? She had to get out. In front of her, a head with parted blonde hair and pigtails sat absolutely still on its shoulders. Staring into it, Liesel revisited those dark rooms of her past and her mother answering questions made up of one word. She saw it all so clearly. Her starving mother, her missing father, Kommunisten, her dead brother. And now we say goodbye to this trash, this poison. Just before Liesel Memminger pivoted with nausea to exit the crowd, the shiny brown-shirted creature walked from the podium. He received a torch from an accomplice and lit the mound, which dwarfed him in all its culpability. Heil Hitler. The audience, Heil Hitler. A collection of men walked from a platform and surrounded the heap, igniting it, much to the approval of everyone. Voices climbed over shoulders, and the smell of pure German sweat struggled at first, then poured out. It rounded corner after corner till they were all swimming in it. The words, the sweat, and smiling. Let's not forget the smiling. Many jocular comments followed, as did another onslaught of Heil Hitlering. You know, it actually makes me wonder if anyone ever lost an eye or injured a hand or wrist with all of that. You'd only need to be facing the wrong way at the wrong time or stand marginally too close to another person. Perhaps people did get injured. Personally, I can only tell you that no one died from it, or at least not physically. There was, of course, the matter of 40 million people I picked up by the time the whole thing was finished, but that's getting all metaphoric. Allow me to return us to the fire. The orange flames waved at the crowd as paper and print dissolved inside them. Burning words were torn from their sentences. On the other side, beyond the blurry heat, it was impossible to see the brown shirts and swastikas joining hands. You didn't see people, only uniforms and signs. Birds above did laps. These circled, somehow attracted to the glow, until they came too close to the heat. Or was it the humans? Certainly the heat was nothing. In her attempt to escape, a voice found her. Liesel. It made its way through and she recognized it. It was not Rudy, but she knew that voice. She twisted free and found the face attached to it. Oh no. Ludwig Schmeichel. He did not, as she expected, sneer or joke or make any conversation at all. All he was able to do was pull her toward him and motion to his ankle. It had been crushed among the excitement and was bleeding dark and ominous through his sock. His face wore a helpless expression beneath his tangled blonde hair. An animal. Not a deer in lights, nothing so typical or specific. He was just an animal, hurt among the melee of its own kind, soon to be trampled by it. Okay, so this boy, si Ludwig Schmeichel, the one who was bullying her before, the one she beat up, okay, during this bonfire where people were going wild, no, and everyone was being a Nazi, basically, he got his ankle got twisted and he was gonna be trampled, but Liesel saves him. So she goes from being his bully to being his savior. She helps him up and she brings him away from the crowd. Somehow she helped him up and dragged him toward the back. Fresh air. They staggered to the steps at the side of the church. There was some room there and they rested, both relieved. Breath collapsed from Schmeichel's mouth. It slipped down over his throat. He managed to speak. Sitting down, he held his ankle and found Liesel Meminger's face. Thanks, he said, to her mouth rather than her eyes. More slabs of breath, and they both watched images of schoolyard antics, followed by a schoolyard beating. I'm sorry. For, you know. Liesel heard it again. Kommunisten. She chose, however, to focus on Ludwig Schmeichel. Me too. Oh, I love it. She has kind of this touching moment with her bully and the one she beat up said. He said sorry, and she said sorry too. They both concentrated on breathing then, for there was nothing more to do or say. Their business had come to an end. The blood enlarged on Ludwig Schmeichel's ankle. A single word leaned against the girl. To their left, flames and burning books were cheered like heroes. Okay. The gates of thievery. She remained on the steps waiting for Papa, watching the stray ash and the corpse of collected books. Everything was sad. Orange and red embers looked like rejected candy, and most of the crowd had vanished. She'd seen Frau Diller leave, very satisfied, and Pfiffikus, white hair, a Nazi uniform, the same dilapidated shoes, and a triumphant whistle. Now there was nothing but cleaning up, and soon no one would even imagine it had happened. But you could smell it. What are you doing? Hans Habermann arrived at the church steps. Hi, Papa. You were supposed to be in front of the town hall. Sorry, Papa. He sat down next to her, halving his tallness on the concrete and taking a piece of Liesel's hair. His fingers adjusted it gently behind her ear. Liesel, what's wrong? For a while she said nothing. She was making calculations, despite already knowing. An 11-year-old girl is many things, but she is not stupid. A small addition, the word communist, a large bonfire, a collection of dead letters, the suffering of her mother, the death of her brother. equals the fear. The fear. He was the they that Hans and Rosa Huberman were talking about that evening when she first wrote to her mother. She knew it, but she had to ask. Is my mother a communist? Staring straight ahead, they were always asking her things before I came here. Hans edged forward a little, forming the beginning of a lie. I have no idea. I never met her. Did the Fuhrer take her away? The question surprised them both, and it forced Papa to stand up. He looked at the brown-shirted men taking to the pile of ash with the shovels. He could hear them hacking into it. Another lie was growing in his mouth, but he found it impossible to let it out. He said, I think he might have, yes. I knew it. The words were thrown at the steps, and Liesel could feel the slush of anger stirring hotly in her stomach. I hate the Fuhrer, she said. I hate him. And Hans Huberman, what did he do? What did he say? Did he bend down and embrace his foster daughter as he wanted to? Did he tell her that he was sorry for what was happening to her mother, for what had happened to her brother? Not exactly. He clenched his eyes, then opened them. He slapped Liesel Memminger squarely in the face. Hans Huberman has been the kindest, most gentle character ever. But in this moment, when Liesel says, I hate the Fuhrer, he was kind of like so shocked by it, and then he slaps her. Don't ever say that. His voice was quiet but sharp. As the girl shook and sagged on the steps, he sat next to her and held his face in his hands. It would be easy to say that he was just a tall man sitting, poor-postured, and shattered on some church steps, but he wasn't. At the time, Liesel had no idea that her foster father, Hans Huberman, was contemplating one of the most dangerous dilemmas a German citizen could face. Not only that, he'd been facing it for close to a year. Papa? The surprise in her voice rushed her, but it also rendered her useless. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. She could take a Vatchen from nuns and roses, but it hurt so much from Papa. The hands were gone from Papa's face now, and he found the resolve to speak again. You can say that in our house, he said, looking gravely at Liesel's cheek, but you never say it on the street, at school, at the BDM, never. He stood in front of her and lifted her by the triceps. He shook her. Do you hear me? With her eyes trapped wide open, Liesel nodded her compliance. It was in fact a rehearsal for a future lecture when all of Hans Huberman's worst fears arrived on Himmel Street later that year in the early hours of a November morning. Good. He placed her back down. Now, let us try. At the bottom of the steps, Papa stood erect and cocked his arm. 45 degrees. Heil Hitler. Liesel stood up and also raised her arm. With absolute misery, she repeated it. Heil Hitler. It was quite a sight, an 11-year-old girl trying not to cry on the church steps, saluting the Fuhrer as the voices over Papa's shoulder chopped and beat at the dark shape in the background. Are we still friends? Perhaps a quarter of an hour later, Papa held a cigarette olive branch in his palm. The paper and tobacco he'd just received. Without a word, Liesel reached gloomily across and proceeded to roll it. Okay, so Hans Huberman, good guys, he isn't a Nazi, good, but Liesel saying that in public was so dangerous. If someone heard, if a soldier heard, that would be the end of Liesel and of their family. No, even if you say, like, I hate Hitler, in this time, that's grounds already for you to be imprisoned, grounds for you to be killed, and so Hans was so scared that she just said it out loud that he reacted by slapping her, no? But now he's trying to make peace with her. And he's like, you can't say that out here. You have to pretend you support Hitler. You can say it at home. You can say it when we're alone. But you cannot say it in public. Good. For quite a while, they sat there together. Smoke climbed over Papa's shoulder. After another 10 minutes, the gates of thievery would open just a crack, and Liesel Memminger would widen them a little further and squeeze through. 2 questions. Would the gate shut behind her, or would they have the goodwill to let her back out? As Liesel would discover, a good thief requires many things: stealth, nerve, speed. More important than any of those things, however, was one final requirement: luck. Actually, forget the 10 minutes. The gates open now. So now we're in the last part of part 2. Okay, we're in the last section, Book of Fire, and it's when she steals her second book. After the bonfire, after she realizes she hates Hitler, then the second book comes to her. Book of Fire. The dark came in pieces, and with the cigarette brought to an end, Liesel and Hans Huberman began to walk home. To get out of the square, they would walk past the bonfire site and through a small side road onto Munich Street. They didn't make it that far. A middle-aged carpenter named Wolfgang Edel called out. He'd built the platforms for the Nazi big shots to stand on during the fire. And he was in the process now of pulling them down. Hans Huberman? He had long sideburns that pointed to his mouth in a dark voice. Hansi. Hi, Wolfal, Hans replied. There was an introduction to the girl and a Heil Hitler. Good Liesel. For the first few minutes, Liesel stayed within a 5-meter radius of the conversation. Fragments came past her, but she didn't pay too much attention. Getting much work? No, it's all tighter now. You know how it is, especially when you're not a member. You told me you were joining, Hansi. I tried, but I made a mistake. I think they're still considering. Liesel wandered toward the mountain of ash. It sat like a magnet, like a freak. Irresistible to the eyes, similar to the road of yellow stars. As with her previous urge to see the mound's ignition, she could not look away. All alone, she didn't have the discipline to keep a safe distance. It sucked her toward it, and she began to make her way around. Above her, the sky was completing its routine of darkening, but far away, over the mountain's shoulder, there was a dull trace of light. Pass off, Kind, a uniform said to her at one point. Look out, child, as he shoveled some more ash onto a cart. Closer to the town hall under a light, some shadows stood and talked, most likely exulting in the success of the fire. From Liesel's position, their voices were only sounds, not words at all. For a few minutes she watched the men shoveling up the pile, at first making it smaller at the sides, to allow more of it to collapse. They came back and forth from a truck, and after 3 return trips, when the heap was reduced near the bottom, a small section of living material slipped from inside the ash. The material: half a red flag, 2 posters advertising a Jewish poet, 3 books, and a wooden sign with something written on it in Hebrew. Perhaps they were damp, perhaps the fire didn't burn long enough to fully reach the depth where they sat. Whatever the reason, they were huddled among the ashes, shaken. Survivors. 3 books, Liesel spoke softly, and she looked at the backs of the men. Okay, so in the ashes, 3 books didn't burn, and Liesel was looking at those 3 books. Come on, said one of them. Hurry up, will you? I'm starving. They moved toward the truck. The threesome of books poked their noses out. Liesel moved in. The heat was still strong enough to warm her when she stood at the foot of the ash heap. When she reached her hand in, she was bitten, but on the second attempt she made sure she was fast enough. She latched onto the closest of the books. It was hot, but it was also wet, burned only at the edges, but otherwise unhurt. It was blue. The cover felt like it was woven with hundreds of tightly drawn strings and clamped down. Red letters were pressed into those fibers. The only word Liesel had time to read was shoulder. There wasn't enough time for the rest, and there was a problem: the smoke. Smoke lifted from the cover as she juggled it and hurried away. Her head was pulled down, and the sick beauty of nerves proved more ghastly with each stride. There were 14 steps till the voice. It propped itself up behind her. Hey! That was when she nearly ran back and tossed the book onto the mound, but she was unable. The only movement at her disposal was the act of turning. There are some things here that didn't burn. It was one of the cleanup men. He was not facing the girl, but rather the people standing by the town hall. So Liesel took one of the books, no, she hid it under her coat, and then she moved away, and then someone called, "Hey," and she thought it was because someone caught her, but actually it wasn't. They were talking about the unburned books, not about her stealing one of them. "Well, burn them again," came the reply, "and watch them burn. I think they're wet. Do I have to do everything myself?" The sound of footsteps passed by. It was the mayor, wearing a black coat over his Nazi uniform. He didn't notice the girl who stood absolutely still only a short distance away. A realization. A statue of the book thief stood in the courtyard. It's very rare, don't you think, for a statue to appear before its subject has become famous. She sank, the thrill of being ignored. The book felt cold enough now to slip inside her uniform. At first it was nice and warm against her chest. As she began walking, though, it began to heat up again. By the time she made it back to Papa and Wolfgang Edel, the book was starting to burn her. It seemed to be igniting. So she hid it under her coat and she was walking, and it was still hot from the fire that it began to burn her skin. No? It seemed to be igniting. Both men looked at her. She smiled. Immediately, when the smile shrank from her lips, she could feel something else. Or more to the point, someone else. There was no mistaking the watched feeling. It was all over her, and it was confirmed when she dared to face the shadows over at the town hall. To the side of the collection of silhouettes, another one stood, a few meters removed, and Liesel realized two things. A few small pieces of recognition, the shadow's identity, and the fact that it had seen everything. So Liesel stole the book, hid it, walked back, and she thought she got away with it. But then she realizes that someone saw her. Someone was standing, and someone saw her steal the second book. The shadow's hands were in its coat pockets. It had fluffy hair. If it had a face, the expression on it would have been one of injury. Liesel, and she says a bad word here, so teep, Liesel said, only loud enough for herself. And then she cursed again. Who has fluffy hair that we know? Who among the characters is always described as having fluffy hair, no? Always described, good nga, this character has fluffy hair. Do you know it? It is the wife of the mayor. The wife of the mayor, no, the one with the fluffy hair, the one who's always wearing a bathrobe. She saw Liesel steal this forbidden book. Are we ready to go? In the previous moments of stupendous danger, Papa had said goodbye to Wolfgang Edel and was ready to accompany Liesel home. Ready, she answered. They began to leave the scene of the crime, and the book was well and truly burning her now. The shoulder shrug had applied itself to her rib cage. As they walked past the precarious town hall shadows, the book thief winced. What's wrong, Papa asked. Nothing. Quite a few things, however, were most definitely wrong. Smoke was rising out of Liesel's collar. A necklace of sweat had formed around her throat. Beneath her shirt, a book was eating her up. So she gets caught by the wife of the mayor, and who knows what the consequences of that will be. You will find out in part 3.